What happens when the spirit of constitutional protection, the part that's designed to safeguard ancient cultures, protect ancestral land, and ensure self-determination classes head-on with the harsh reality of administrative failure?
And relentless economic exploitation.
Exactly. We're talking about regions that were specifically carved out under the Indian Constitution, areas defined by these really unique governance clauses like Article 244 in the Fifth Schedule.
And the stakes here are just immense. This is not some, academic footnote.
Not at all. Failure to administer these areas correctly, and we've seen this in a critical UPSC mains question our sources point to, it has a direct critical link to some of our biggest internal security challenges.
Specifically the growth of left-wing extremism.
Right. And that connection alone shows why mastering this isn't just, extra knowledge. It is absolutely fundamental to understanding national governance and security. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we streamline massive amounts of information. And today we are zeroing in on the foundational text of Indian Polity, Laxmikanth's 8th edition, Chapter 42, into actionable insights just for you. Our whole mission here is to turn these complex constitutional provisions into synthesized knowledge you can actually use. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of how our tribal areas are governed, we want to start with a massive shout-out to all of our existing paid members.
Yes, a huge thank you.
Your support is incredible, and it truly helps us keep these super useful deep dives coming. It lets us invest the time to really break down these complex chapters. So if you find this content valuable for your preparation, please take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and share your comments down below. And if you're able, please consider joining our paid membership on YouTube to support us even further. We also want to make sure you have all the tools you need. So free notes, which include practice previous year questions on this very topic, are available on our Telegram channel.
And for those of you who are really serious about the mains exam, we have premium notes. They've got extra KYQs and comprehensive model answers for those really complex analytical questions.
And you can find those on our Discord channel, exclusively for our Legend YouTube members, so please do join there. Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are extracting the most crucial governance nuggets from this chapter on scheduled and tribal areas, interpreting the mechanisms of the 5th and 6th schedules, and connecting it all directly to those critical analytical questions.
And what's so fascinating here is that the administration of these areas, it's not some mere policy footnote. It is a profound distinguishing feature of Indian federalism.
Right. It's core to the whole structure.
It is. It deals explicitly with how the Republic manages its immense diversity, how it addresses historical injustice, and how it structures local self-determination. The provisions under Article 244 are basically the Constitution's way of saying that for these regions, a distinct framework is absolutely essential.
A different set of rules.
A completely different set of rules, based on recognizing unique cultural heritage and historical isolation. This entire structure is an attempt to balance two competing ideas: national integration on one hand and cultural preservation on the other.
A tough balance to strike.
Extremely tough. And to really get it, you have to focus on the two specialized mechanisms that come from Article 244, the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule. We need to analyze the foundational difference because their objectives are structurally distinct.
Okay, so what's the core difference?
The 5th schedule deals with administration and let's call it protective control in states outside the Northeast. It's about oversight to prevent exploitation. The 6th schedule, in contrast, focuses on a much stronger institutionalized model of self-rule and comprehensive autonomy in specific northeastern states.
So protection versus self-rule.
Exactly. Understanding that distinction between protective control versus institutionalized self-governance is where all the constitutional brilliance and, frankly, all the administrative headache lies.
We are starting with the foundational legal anchor, which is Article 244 of the Indian Constitution. Now, this article, by relating to the administration of scheduled and tribal areas, immediately tells us that these regions are, well, functionally ring-fenced in terms of governance. They're completely different from the general structures in Part 6 that govern typical state governments. And this isn't just a minor tweak, it's a radical constitutional decision. So why? Why did the framers feel the need for this distinction? It almost creates what some people call a state within a state.
The need arose because general, uniform laws designed for mainstream settled agricultural or urban societies, they often fail catastrophically when you apply them to tribal communities.
How so?
Well, tribal economies are frequently based on community ownership of land, forest resources, and they have customary laws for marriage and inheritance that are wildly different from mainstream civil codes.
Okay.
So without special constitutional mechanisms, these communities would be immediately vulnerable to resource extraction, land grabbing, and exploitation by outside financial and industrial forces.
And that would lead to a rapid loss of their culture.
And their economic base. So Article 244 is the gateway. It establishes these necessary legal safeguards, acknowledging that governance just cannot be monochromatic in a country as diverse as India.
So let's focus on the fifth schedule first, since it covers the vast majority of India's tribal population outside the Northeast. The schedule is concerned with the administration and control of these areas. If the goal is protection, how is that actually implemented?
The mechanism is all about protective oversight and regulation. The fifth schedule puts these areas primarily under state executive control, but, and this is the critical part, it reserves significant overriding powers directly to the governor of that state.
The governor, so they're the key player.
Absolutely. You should think of the governor in this context as acting as an agent of the union with a special, almost a fiduciary duty to the tribal population.
I see, so it's a check and balance system.
It is. It ensures that even though the area is under state jurisdiction, the union, through the governor, maintains this supervisory and protective role. It acts as a check against potentially exploitative actions by the state legislature or local political interests.
And that protective role, it all hinges on the governor's discretion to modify or veto laws. How expansive is that power, really? Can you give us some specific examples of what they can do?
It's extremely expansive, and it has to be for the protective mandate to work. A governor has the authority to direct that any particular act of parliament or the state legislature shall not apply to a scheduled area.
At all.
Or that it will apply only with specified modifications and exceptions. This is a powerful, almost a parallel legislative authority. And on top of that, the governor can make specific regulations for the peace and good government of the scheduled areas.
What kind of regulations?
Well, the Constitution specifically says these regulations can include, 1, prohibiting or restricting the transfer of land from tribal members to non-tribals. This is the primary economic safeguard.
Okay, that's huge.
It is. 2, regulating the allotment of land to members of scheduled tribes. And 3, regulating the business of money lending to members of scheduled tribes.
To combat debt bondage.
Exactly, to stop that cycle of debt that leads to land loss. This discretionary power allows for this dynamic tailoring of law to fit local needs and prevent the worst forms of exploitation.
But the governor can't just exercise this power in a vacuum, right? There has to be some form of consultation. And that brings us to the Tribe's Advisory Council, or the TAC. What are the rules for that?
Right. The TAC is mandatory in every state that has scheduled areas. Its composition is defined very clearly. It has not more than 20 members.
Okay.
And crucially, as nearly as 3/4 of them must be representatives of the scheduled tribes in the state legislative assembly.
So it's mostly tribal representatives.
By design. And if there aren't enough ST representatives in the assembly, the remaining members are then nominated. Its function is purely advisory. The TAC's duty is to advise the governor on matters of welfare and advancement of the scheduled tribes.
And is the governor bound by that advice?
Not bound, but no regulation concerning peace and good government or modifying the application of laws can be issued without due consultation with the TAC. It's the constitutional mechanism designed to inject the tribal perspective directly into the administrative process.
Okay, so if the fifth schedule creates this robust protective mechanism, you've got a powerful governor, mandatory consultation with the TAC, specific powers to stop land alienation, then why does this structure fail so spectacularly in practice? Which brings us directly back to that critical national security link.
This is where administrative reality just bites the constitutional ideal. We have to analyze the consequences of non-implementation, which, as you said, is a critical UPSC mains question. Analyze the impact of non-implementation of the provisions of the fifth schedule on the growth of left-wing extremism.
So what's the connection?
The fifth schedule is the constitutional guarantee against forced dispossession. When the state machinery, the governor's office, the district collectors, the police fail to rigorously enforce these protections, when they allow unregulated mining to proceed without consent or ignore illegal money lending, that constitutional guarantee collapses.
So it's not a flaw in the law itself, but in the will to execute it.
Precisely. The structural failure happens when administrative negligence just becomes routine. Tribal communities who rely entirely on their land and forests for their way of life find themselves legally defenseless as outsiders encroach.
Displaced by big industrial projects.
Exactly. Displaced without adequate rehabilitation, pushed into debt cycles that result in losing their land. This creates a vacuum of authority and an intense sense of systemic injustice, a feeling of being abandoned by the state.
And that's the opening for extremist groups.
That is the opening. This systemic exploitation provides a fertile breeding ground for extremist ideologies. The left-wing extremists, the LWE, they step into this vacuum. They offer immediate, albeit violent, solutions.
Like what?
They promise to restore land rights. They deliver instant justice against exploitative landlords or companies. They offer protection against the very forces the state machinery failed to control.
Wow.
So the growth of LWE is fundamentally a political and constitutional crisis. It's born from the systemic refusal to uphold the Fifth Schedule's mandate. It confirms that the failure to ensure socioeconomic justice translates directly into a serious national security threat.
That deep dive into the practical mechanisms, the veto, the TAC, the land regulations, it makes that LWE link so much more potent. It's not a theoretical failure, it's a failure of specific, defined duties. Okay, now let's shift gears completely to the Sixth Schedule. This applies only to the administration of tribal areas in 4 northeastern states: Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. AMTM.
A completely different model.
Right. This is a model fundamentally rooted in autonomy, not just protective oversight.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this. Why? Why did the framers isolate these 4 states for a fundamentally different and significantly stronger form of constitutional protection? What was the history behind it?
The rationale lies in the unique historical and cultural status of these communities. Many of the groups covered under the Sixth Schedule, especially in Assam and Meghalaya, had maintained these extensive, robust, independent systems of self-governance for centuries.
Even through the British era.
With very little interference, yes. The Sixth Schedule was conceived, and I'm quoting here, to preserve the democratic traditions and cultural diversity of the people in these regions by institutionalizing their traditional systems of self-rule within the framework of the modern Indian state.
So it was about formalizing what was already there.
Exactly. Therefore, the contrast with the Fifth Schedule is absolute. If the Fifth is about control and protection provided by the state executive, the Sixth is fundamentally about autonomy, institutionalized self-governance, and the creation of subordinate legislatures.
And the mechanism for that is the creation of autonomous districts and regional councils. Can you clarify the difference between an autonomous district, an AD, and an autonomous region, an AR?
Sure, it's a tiered structure. The governor is empowered to organize tribal areas into autonomous districts, or ADs. Now, if there are different scheduled tribes within a single autonomous district, the governor can then further divide that district into autonomous regions, or ARs.
Okay, so it's a way to manage diversity within the district itself.
Precisely. And every AD and every AR has its own governing body, a district council and a regional council, respectively. And these councils are bodies corporate, which means they have perpetual succession and a common seal. It signifies their legal permanence and authority.
So these councils are the engine of self-rule. What are the legislative, executive, and critically, the financial powers that show their true autonomy? Are they just funded by the state, or can they actually raise their own money?
Oh, their powers are extensive. And yes, they absolutely include financial autonomy, which is the hallmark of genuine self-governance.
Okay, let's break that down. Legislative powers.
The councils can make laws on 30 specified subjects related to community life. This includes land management, excluding reserved forests, the use of canal water, shifting cultivation, or village administration.
Even things like marriage and inheritance.
Yes, inheritance of property, marriage, and social customs. These acts require the governor's assent, but they originate entirely within the council.
And executive powers.
They administer their own laws. They manage primary schools, dispensaries, markets, fisheries. They regulate money lending and trade by non-tribals. They're running the day-to-day affairs of the district.
And the financial autonomy. This is the crucial part.
It is. To prove they are not just decorative bodies, they have the power to assess and collect land revenue. Furthermore, they can impose and collect taxes on professions, trades, callings, animals, vehicles, even on the entry of goods into their district.
Wow. So they function like a mini-state government.
In many ways, yes. They also get grants and aid from the Consolidated Fund of India, and they share royalties from resource extraction like mineral exploration with the state government. This revenue-raising capacity makes them financially viable and politically independent.
We mentioned judicial powers earlier. Can you elaborate on how local justice is administered through these councils?
This judicial autonomy is really significant. The district and regional councils are empowered to constitute village councils, or village courts. And these courts are specifically for trying suits and cases between members of scheduled tribes. They use customary law, ensuring that justice is culturally appropriate and locally administered.
Is there an appeal process?
Yes, the hierarchy is structured carefully. District council courts hear appeals from the village courts. However, the state high court retains appellate jurisdiction over more serious cases, where sentences of imprisonment are 5 years or more.
So it's a balance between customary law and the national legal framework.
It is. It ensures local traditions govern civil matters while maintaining the constitutional safety net of the high judiciary for major criminal or civil cases.
So even with all this self-rule, the union has to retain some oversight. In the fifth schedule, the governor is the agent. How does oversight work in the highly autonomous sixth schedule system?
It's a multi-layered oversight, and it's focused on preventing maladministration or constitutional deviance. The governor has the power to approve the rules made by the councils and, importantly, can suspend or annul any act of the council if it's likely to endanger the safety of India or public order.
So they have an emergency brake.
A very powerful one. The governor can also appoint a commission to inquire into the working of a council and can even dissolve it based on the commission's report.
And what about the application of central and state laws?
That's the other key lever of control. The governor of Assam and the president for the other 3 states holds the power to direct that an act of parliament or the state legislature shall not apply to a tribal area, or that it should only apply with specific modifications.
So it's the same power as in the fifth schedule, but held by the president in some cases.
Exactly. This centralized veto ensures that while local autonomy is respected, these communities are shielded from sweeping legislative changes from the state or union. It's this asymmetry of constitutional power that really defines the sixth schedule.
If we step back, this specialized administration, both in the fifth and sixth schedules, it really confirms that India is truly a union of states where the federal structure is constantly adapting.
Indeed. The sixth schedule, in particular, is the clearest constitutional confirmation of India's quasi-federal nature. It moves beyond the standard federal distribution of power to create what are, in effect, sub-federal governments in the form of the ADCs.
Right.
The very existence of these highly autonomous structures confirms the flexibility of the Indian Constitution to accommodate profound diversity while maintaining national integrity. This mechanism is designed to prevent secessionist tendencies by granting political dignity and self-determination within the union framework.
All right, shifting back now to the fifth schedule areas. We established that while the Constitution provides the framework, the actual implementation of self-governance needed more detailed legislation. And that brought us to the PESA Act.
The provisions of the Panchayats Extension to Scheduled Areas Act of 1996.
Right. And PESA was passed because you couldn't just extend the standard Panchayati Raj model, the one from the 73rd Amendment, into these areas. That would have been disastrous.
Highly detrimental. The mainstream model assumed a uniform administrative structure, which would have just steamrolled the existing tribal customary governance and resource management systems. PESA had to ensure that the spirit of the fifth schedule was translated into actionable, ground-level power.
So it was a customization of the 73rd Amendment.
It was a critical customization. PESA mandated that any state legislature making laws for panchayats in scheduled areas had to ensure those laws were consistent with the customary law, religious practices, and traditional management practices of community resources. It aimed to formalize the self-rule that was implicit in the constitutional protection mandate.
So what are the fundamental sort of philosophical objectives that PESA was trying to achieve? This seems key to understanding its model.
The objectives were designed to completely reverse the historical power dynamics. First, and most importantly, self-rule for the bulk of the tribal population.
Okay. Empowerment.
Exactly. Political empowerment and agency. Second, making the Gram Sabha, the village assembly, the nucleus of all activities. This is intentional. It places power in the hands of the entire adult population of the village, ensuring direct, not just representative, democracy at the lowest level.
I see. And what else?
Third, consistency with traditional practices. PESA insists on an administrative framework that is consistent with tradition. This gives formal legal recognition to customary laws and community structures.
So it's about respecting and integrating tradition, not replacing it.
Precisely. And fourth, it requires measures to safeguard and preserve the traditions, customs, cultural identity, and community resources of the scheduled tribes. It makes cultural defense a legal obligation of the state.
The most potent part of PESA, though, seems to be the specific, legally mandated powers it gives the Gram Sabha over resource control. This speaks directly to the exploitation issues linked to LWE. What are those critical powers?
This is where PESA really operationalizes the protective mandate. The Gram Sabha under PESA is given specific, non-negotiable powers. First, mandatory consultation before any land acquisition for development projects.
So they have to be asked.
Not just asked, their recommendation is crucial for the feasibility of any project. They also have to be consulted before resettling or rehabilitating people affected by these projects.
What about forest resources?
This is huge. PESA vests the ownership of minor forest produce, or MFP, entirely with the Gram Sabha.
Ownership, not just the right to collect.
Full ownership. This moves MFP from state control to community control, securing a vital part of the tribal economy.
And minerals.
The Gram Sabha must be consulted before granting any concession for the exploitation of minor minerals. So mining leases, exploration licenses, they hold significant influence over local resource allocation.
And it also has powers over things like liquor sales, right?
Yes, the Gram Sabha has the power to regulate the consumption and sale of intoxicating substances. And finally, there's a structural defense mechanism built in. PESA explicitly aims to prevent panchayats at the higher level from assuming the powers of the Gram Sabha.
A firewall.
It's a structural firewall to prevent the centralization of power within the Panchayati Raj system itself, ensuring that the critical powers over land and resources stay at the village level.
These mandatory powers over land, minor minerals, and forest produce. They sound like the direct legal antidote to the causes of LWE that we talked about earlier.
They are. If the Gram Sabha has ownership and consultation rights over the very resources that attract outside exploitation, the primary drivers of conflict are neutralized.
So the failure to implement PESA fully is the real problem.
Absolutely. The failure to genuinely vest these powers in the Gram Sabhas is a direct administrative failure to enforce the constitutional ideal. When communities see their forests cut down and their land taken despite PESA being on the books, the state's legitimacy is undermined. And that makes the promises of extremist groups highly attractive.
So PESA isn't just a policy act.
It is the statutory key to achieving peace and integration in the fifth schedule areas.
Okay, so while the schedules in PESA create these specialized systems, the constitutional rights of these citizens are still the absolute foundation. We have to connect this back to the fundamental rights and the directive principles.
Indeed. It's crucial to anchor this discussion in Part 3 of the Constitution. When tribal populations face displacement or environmental degradation, the legal challenge often relies on the expansive interpretation of fundamental rights by the judiciary.
And the key right here is Article 21, the right to life.
Article 21 is the most crucial instrument. The Supreme Court has repeatedly expanded it well beyond just physical existence. For tribal communities, this expansion includes the right to livelihood.
How does that apply?
Since the tribal way of life is intrinsically linked to the forest and land, any action like sudden displacement for a dam or a mine that threatens this connection can be challenged as a violation of the right to livelihood, which is protected under Article 21.
And what about the environment?
The court has also read the right to a decent environment into Article 21. This includes the right to pollution-free water and air and the maintenance of ecological balance. This gives Gram Sabhas a legal basis to challenge industrial projects that threaten their environment.
So the judiciary acts as a vital last line of defense, interpreting general rights in a way that gives leverage to marginalized communities.
Precisely. And complementing these justiciable rights are the directive principles of state policy, the DPSPs, which outline the state's moral commitment. Specifically, Article 46 is the ideological engine here.
What does Article 46 say?
It mandates the state to promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other weaker sections, and to protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation.
This DPSP is critical because it explains why Article 244 exists. It sets the constitutional purpose.
Exactly. Article 46 provides the policy foundation for every protective measure we've discussed. The governor's veto, the TAC, PESA, the autonomy of the sixth schedule. It establishes that the state has a fundamental duty to not just uplift these groups, but to proactively legislate and act to prevent exploitation.
So this complex layering of specialized law, enforceable rights, and guiding duties, it just confirms the unique asymmetry of Indian federalism.
It confirms the reality of the strong center tendency. While the overall structure is federal, the power vested in the president and governor to modify or veto laws for these regions serves a specific protective function.
A protective function for the center.
Right. It ensures that vulnerable tribal populations aren't left entirely to the mercies of local state politics or dominant economic interests. The center is positioned as the ultimate guarantor of their constitutional protections. It's a balance where special status and centralized oversight work together.
In essence, the administration of these areas is the ultimate constitutional tightrope walk, balancing central authority with local self-rule, all aimed at protecting identity and preventing the kind of exploitation that leads to instability.
And when that balance fails, as the link to left-wing extremism proves, it signifies a failure of administrative integrity to uphold the very extensive constitutional tools that were deliberately provided for this purpose. The framework is sound. The execution is the perpetual challenge.
We've concluded our deep dive into the specialized constitutional architecture for scheduled and tribal areas. We spent time understanding the core purpose of Article 244, which bifurcates administration via the 5th schedule, focused on protective control, and the 6th schedule, which is all about self-rule for the AMTM states.
A crucial distinction.
A crucial distinction. And we analyzed the direct and critical link between the non-implementation of 5th schedule protections, especially regarding land rights and PESA, and the subsequent growth of left-wing extremism. We emphasize that safeguarding land rights is a vital component of national security. We also saw how PESA aims to correct these structural deficiencies by constitutionally empowering the Gram Sabha with real resource control. So what does this all mean for you, the learner? It means that India's constitutional flexibility is one of its greatest strengths. It allows for this highly specialized governance where needed, but, and this is a big but, this flexibility relies entirely on the honest, rigorous implementation of these measures by the executive branch.
At every single level.
At every single level.
Yeah.
The depth of the constitutional law is only as strong as the political and administrative will behind it.
Which raises an important, final, provocative question for you to consider as you study this topic. Given the comprehensive constitutional and statutory framework we've discussed, Article 244, the schedules, PESA, which strongly favors local self-rule and protection, is the primary hurdle to tribal development, a deficiency in the law itself. Or is it, rather, a failure of the will and the process to use the already extensive constitutional tools available?
Law versus will.
Exactly. This is the core question of administrative integrity versus constitutional design that must inform your analytical preparation.
A profound thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this in-depth exploration of this critical constitutional topic. Once again, a huge shout out to all our dedicated members. Your continued support is essential and truly helps us continue this journey. If you found this deep dive useful for your preparation, please make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share your comments below. And don't forget, free notes and practice PYQs are waiting for you on our Telegram channel.
And the premium notes with Model Main's answers are available for our Legend members on Discord.
Your subscription and support makes a real difference. We hope to see you on the next deep dive.